Some careers follow a path. And then there are careers built by constantly stepping into the unknown, industries still evolving, roles without defined playbooks, and problems with no clear answers. Ankur Gupta has spent over a decade doing exactly that. From consulting at Infosys to building marketplaces at Quikr to scaling checkout and payments at Myntra to launching new business lines at Swiggy to helping shape Stripe's growth in India. And today, building financial and strategic partnerships at Pine Labs, where he's been a part of scaling an omni channel payments business from the ground up. But what stands out isn't just the companies, it's the pattern. A tendency to move towards ambiguity, to operate where the playbook doesn't exist, and to build by connecting dots across product, partnerships, and ecosystems. Today isn't just about roles or resume, it's about how you think when nothing is clearly defined, how you make decisions when you're building in real time, and how you grow when every role demands a different version of you. Ankur, I'm really excited for this conversation and thank you for giving time on your calendar.
No, thanks a lot, Ekta, for being so diligent and for ensuring that we make this happen. I know it was a slightly elusive discussion, but to be fair with you, I'm super excited and a little bit nervous because, as I was telling you earlier, this format is something which is new to me. But like I said, it's super. I would love to talk about what my journey has been like. And I would love to chat with you and give a little bit of perspective in terms of the different industries that I have been and my experience over the years.
Alrighty, perfect. On that really kick ass note, let's start. Um, Ankur, when I look at your journey, there's a very clear pattern. You keep stepping into spaces where things are still being built. You've consistently chosen roles where the playbook didn't exist. Question is, was that intentional or something you understood about yourself over time?
I I wish I could say it was a grand master plan, but honestly, it wasn't. Uh, I think early in my career, I was just saying yes to interesting problems. And those problems happened to be in the spaces where nobody really knew what exactly was required to be done. Though over a period of time, I started figuring out a pattern for myself where I was getting more energized when things were more chaotic, when there was something completely net new that was required to be done, when there wasn't a clear answer, right? And you have to figure things out from first principles.
Yeah.
So I really enjoyed being in rooms when people were saying, we don't know how to do this yet, but this is something that we would love to achieve, because that's exactly where you actually get to build and not just execute, right? So I would say that it was not intentional at first, but eventually it became a conscious choice for me that this is exactly the kind of things that I would love to do.
So, in that respect, let me ask you, do you think most people avoid ambiguity too early in their career?
The answer is yes, I think so. And also, I think it's completely understandable, to be fair with you. When you're early in your career, you're looking for clarity, you're looking for structure, you're looking for validation. Because basically, something that tells you that you're doing good, somebody who's, kind of supporting what you're doing, right? And ambiguity gives you none of that. So, obviously, people try to avoid that. But on the flip side, Ekta, I'll tell you, ambiguity is where the maximum amount of learning happens, right? In structured roles, you get to learn how things work. And in unstructured roles, you get to learn why things work, or maybe why they don't work on the other side. And that difference massively compounds the learning that an individual has in their professional journey over a period of time. So I think people don't avoid ambiguity because they don't want to learn. It is because it makes them uncomfortable. It's because they do not really know how to navigate that particular, unstructured chaos. But I think once people get a sense or get a grip of in terms of how to navigate it, it gives you a huge edge later on in life.
Lovely, beautifully answered. Leads me to the next question, which is what did ambiguity teach you that structured roles could not? Tell me from your perspective.
Mm, Actually, a bunch of things, but um, I'll tell you something. One thing that I've really learned is that progress in one's life is rarely linear, or it's
Hmm.
rarely structured. What I mean to say by that is clarity usually comes after you start.
Yeah.
You cannot have clarity right at the beginning when you're trying to do some of these new things. It usually comes a little later once you have done a few wrong things, once you have built a system around it, right? And in most of the ambiguous roles, you're building the system itself, to be honest, right? And that teaches you a few things. For example, number one, you learn to make decisions with incomplete information. You will never have total information from A to B. This is how you have to navigate. So you learn to do that. Number two, you learn to believe that bias for action is very important. So, for example, you have to do imperfect things early rather
Hmm.
than doing perfect things late. And that
Hmm.
makes a whole lot of difference in terms of how we are getting things done.
Yeah.
Number third, you will realize that most problems are actually people problems, not
Okay.
system problems, not technology issues. A lot of them are people problems, our limitations, teams limitations, the way people think, the way they want to kind of perceive themselves,
Yeah.
and start getting comfortable in terms of solving them. And I think that's a very underrated skill when you learn to recognize that, this is what the problem, or even if you are a part of that problem, you learn to recognize that and you know exactly how to navigate that. Because
Hmm.
when there's no playbook, right, nobody is 100% right or nobody's 100% wrong. You're still
Yeah.
figuring out what needs to be done.
All right. Oh my God, such nicely answered question. Um, See, in your case, Ankur, ambiguity we feel has not been just in one domain. You've done this across industries, right? You
Yeah.
worked across fintech, e-commerce, and consumer internet, industries that operate very differently. How
Hmm.
do you adapt your thinking when you switch contexts? It's not easy.
That's absolutely true. It's not. And I think what one needs to realize is that the one of the important shifts is that every industry has a different definition of what good looks like for them, right? What I mean is that, let's say, e-commerce, where speed and getting the right conversion is critical. In fintech, it's
Yeah.
trust and reliability because you're actually handling somebody's money. In consumer internet, it's mostly about engagement and building that long-term habit for the end consumer, right? So, when you switch context for different companies, for different domains, you also have to reset your instincts a little bit. What I mean by that is that early on, even I used to carry assumptions that, if this is happening in A company, similar thing will be required in B company as well.
Mm.
But it doesn't always work that way.
Yeah.
So, over a period of time, I've started going by first principles that in any organization, what does success look like here, right? What are users actually optimizing for? And importantly, if things can break in a really bad way, what exactly will that be? What can go wrong? Because when you know what can go wrong, you will kind of try to solve for that. You will try to stop for that, right? Once you get these things out of the way, then I think the rest becomes a little simpler because now you know this is the path that I want to kind of follow.
Yeah, yeah. Like I said, beautifully answered. I don't know how many times will I be saying this to all your answers. What we've understood is a framework of how you think, irrespective of the industry, depending upon the knowledge and how that industry works. Tell me, each time you're taking a decision, what constantly stays in your decision making and what completely changes each time? If you could categorize for us.
Sure. I'll tell you one thing which always stays consistent with me is I always think about the end user. Like, what exactly does the user want, right? And more often than not, Ekta, what happens is I am a very, how do I say, consumer first person. So I always think that if I was the person who wanted to do this, will I enjoy this? Or this is the other way that I would prefer to do that. So I always place myself in that position and try to approach things from there, right?
Hmm.
Second is it becomes very important that you have to understand the incentives, right? For
Hmm.
example, what works for what kind of a system. In certain scenarios, people have different incentives. For example, organization will have different incentives in terms of what it wants to achieve. You need to understand and recognize those incentives very early on to ensure that you are able to deliver those. And I think finally, most of the times, as I was mentioning early on in the discussion, I go by very first principle. So I try to keep things as simple as possible. I try to understand what is required, how to solve for this, and then accordingly, proceed that. Coming to the point that you mentioned, because see, sorry, just one more thing I wanted to add is that even when you change industries, right?
Yeah.
um, Human behavior does not change. See,
Hmm.
as I was saying, when you think about the user, you're thinking about the human behavior. That element remains consistent, because what the end consumer wants in every industry will be the Bible of what needs to be done there.
Hmm.
And on the other side, if you think about things that change, right? That's what you asked, what stays consistent, what changes. Uh, you know, Parameters around risk, around tolerance, around time to market, all of those are something that change significantly. As I
Yeah.
was mentioning, I think, for example, in consumer businesses, you have to move fast. You have to experiment, fail fast, and very quickly iterate, right?
Hmm.
Only then you will be able to get the right answer, because you don't know what that consumer is looking for. And every consumer, every cohort of a consumer will be very different. On the other side, when it comes to more regulated industries like fintech or payments, even one single bad decision can have very large real consequences, right? Financially, legally, reputation wise. So the bar for decision making in terms of every industry will accordingly change, accordingly evolve. So the feedback loop that you will create for that industry will also change accordingly. So I think those things, they force you to be a little bit more patient,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
guess, and they kind of ensure that you think a little bit more upfront and then accordingly execute your things.
Lovely. Now, you've elaborated everything so nicely, step by step. But let me ask you, was there a moment ever where you felt completely out of depth? Has there been any situation like that before?
I think so many of them, to be fair with you.
Okay. Can you
Because as
cite
I
one
think,
for us?
yeah, I will. So I'll tell you, I think when from the consumer side of business,
Mhm.
when I was with Quikr or a Myntra or a Swiggy, I moved to a financial services side of business. And that initial transition, while I was already working in financial partners in the consumer businesses as well, but when you move fully to the other side of the table, understanding what exactly is required, that risk framework, that regulation, the kind of participants who are there in every conversation, that entire transition was not easy, because
Mm.
I always used to think I don't even know if I'm asking the right question, if the
Mm.
assumptions that I'm making are in the right direction or not. And that becomes very important, because unless you yourself recognize that there are some shortcomings which are there, and you're not 100% right where you should be, you will
Yeah.
not be able to kind of correct yourself in the first way. So I think that phase of ensure or that phase of realizing that you're completely out of depth is very important. And I think the way that I dealt with it was that I started, maybe in those initial few months, I started listening more. I started asking more questions. I started, being humble that, this is something that I absolutely don't know. Please help me. Because those things eventually ensured that I was able to connect the dots in the right way. I was
Yeah.
able to tell people that, this is something that I'm trying to adapt to. This is something which is new for me, but I'll reach there.
Yeah.
I'll deliver on what is required.
All right, lovely. We learned everything about adapting in different industries that you work with. Now let's talk about building, because we feel that adapting and building can be altogether different ball games, right? You've done both, building from zero and scaling existing systems. Let me ask you, which one feels more natural to you? Also tell us why.
Good question. I'll tell you, I think I enjoy the 0 to 1 journey a lot.
Okay.
I've done that 0 to 1 journey in quite a few stints myself. And I've realized that personally, it's super exciting.
Mm.
Smaller teams, quick decisions, everything feels like progress, right? Even
Yeah.
smaller things will make you clap for yourself.
Yeah.
Um, and you can actually also get away with a lot of things because you end up making a lot of mistakes, and it's okay. Nobody will recognize these are mistakes because there's no set playbook. But on the other side, 1 to 100, that journey is something that I respect a lot, because I've realized that over a duration of time, suddenly once scale comes in, things break in a way you did not expect, right?
Mm,
Or small inefficiencies, as I was talking about, they suddenly become big problems.
mhm.
So it's not really, the decisions that you have made earlier start having, how do I say, second order effects.
Yeah.
So you have to be very careful about what you're doing in a 0 to 1 journey, what you're doing in a 1 to 100 journey. So personally, for me, while 0 to 1 feels like, very comfortable, natural, but I realize that uh, each journey in each phase of an organization is equally important, because the learning, the application and implementation that you do
Mm,
evolves and learns and ensures that you are up to date with everything that's happening.
mm. All right. Nice. Um, Talking about scaling, tell us what breaks first when something starts scaling, and at what point does intuition stop working and systems take over? How do you define that point? Or can you define that point?
Um, I'll tell you. Let me answer the first part of the question, which is what breaks first when things start scaling. I think mostly it's the processes, because the initially process that you have defined, you generally have not accounted for a certain scale in the initial phase of things. So processes start breaking almost always, or whatever worked earlier. The people understanding, or the application, or the resource utilization that you have, that suddenly becomes very difficult. Communication, by the way, I've realized at scale, communication goes already left, right, and center, because people suddenly realize that something which is happening for 10 people is now happening for 1,000 people. So
Yeah.
these are the things which definitely I've seen start breaking. And,
Mm,
once suddenly systems which were good enough that, kaam chal jayega, have
mm.
become bottlenecks now.
Yeah.
So I think the real challenge is that you have to recognize early that what got you from 0 to 1 is not going to take you from 1 to 100. That's number one. I think number two is that I don't think that intuition that we were talking about, right?
Yeah.
Uh, it ever fully goes away, right?
Okay.
Um, it's not that it stops working and systems take over. I think what happens is that it just gets built into the system in a way, because as I was mentioning, you are the ones who's building the system.
Mm,
Early stage, it's almost intuition who's always driving the decisions,
mm,
because you don't have data, you don't know the right problem, you don't know the right answer. But once you start scaling, there are layers which come in. There's data, there's processes, there's audit, there's checks and balances. All these things come in. So the opportunity for making mistakes, that filtration process itself becomes so much stronger that the opportunity for making mistakes goes away, right? Or
mm.
reduces, rather, I would say. So I think you rely on intuition even at scale as
Yeah.
things become a little bit more chaotic, right? I think the sweet spot, I would say, is that you use your intuition to decide what to do, and then
Yeah.
you use the system to ensure that that execution happens in the right way. I think
Hmm.
that balance, I think that's the best place to be in.
Like I said, I don't know how many times I'm going to say you're answering so well. Alrighty.
Trying.
I think this is one of my most interesting questions, which is when you were building at Pine Labs or Swiggy, what were the early signs that something would scale? How would you get that idea?
One of the things that gives you the signal that something that you have built is being built for
Yeah.
scale, and this is something that will sustain, is generally when you start seeing repeat patterns or repeat behavior or repeat usage from consumers without incentivizing or without pushing too hard. What I mean by that is, for example, merchants will by default start coming back. Users will start using the product without a lot of incentives, or teams will start building more scalable systems on top of the basic core which was created. I think that generally is a very strong sign. It very clearly says that what you have created is something which is strong enough to sustain the test of time.
Yeah.
Second, I think, is also when problems become, how do I say, more democratic. What I mean by that
Okay.
is that look at it this way. Um, if I have a particular problem that I'm solving in my particular role, and then suddenly that problem is something which is being solved by others as well, because that is their problem as well, it means your system has scaled. It means that if I was thinking about solving for new user activation and suddenly the org is thinking about new user activation, it means that system has gone to the next level. That
Yeah.
teams want to use your system, right?
Hmm.
Or customers are expecting that as the baseline.
Hmm.
I think ensuring that what you're trying to solve for is something that everyone wants to solve for is another signal that the scale is coming or you're going in the right direction.
Hmm. All right, Ankur. Now, listen, we feel that a big part of scaling today isn't just the product, it's how you build ecosystems around it. And a lot of your work sits at the intersection of partnerships, product, and strategy. So, in your opinion, what does a great partnership actually look like?
First of all, I think I've been very lucky that I've got to work in the intersection of these domains because each of them individually have so much depth, have so much intelligence that you can gather out of it. But to be fair, a great partnership, and I think this is a almost like a very well-known answer, is that a great partnership is something where neither side loses and both feel that they have not lost.
Yeah.
Difference between what I'm saying, Ekta, versus what somebody would say that both the sides should win is
Hmm.
very different.
Hmm.
Both winning is very difficult.
Very
Both
difficult.
not losing on the other side is a
Yeah.
much more happy place to be in because it's not just about this is nice to have or something like that. It's more about this is actually something which is important for us, right?
Sure.
In reality, though, most partnerships don't easily get there. They look great on paper, you make your announcements, you do your PR, but
Yeah.
the outcomes over a period of time change significantly, right? So the ones that usually work, either they have a very clear problem, they have a very clearly aligned incentives for both the parties, or there are people like me who are absolutely obsessed about making it work. So they push it through and make it work. But yeah, I mean, honestly, partnerships, I believe, is one of the most important and fulfilling work that most of the organizations focus on.
All right, perfect. Talking about partnership, tell us, do you think it's more alignment or leverage? Where would you want to tilt?
Very good question. I think I would say it's more alignment
Okay.
to start with,
Mhm.
because alignment gets you your shared goals. It
Hmm.
gets you the right fitment. It gets you mutual interest. But eventually, the outcome has to be leverage, right?
Yeah.
Because leverage is what will drive the result for you. What I mean by that is the leverage could be distribution, it could be product capabilities, it could be your consumer set that you're bringing onto the table.
Hmm. Hmm.
Either way, right? If there is no real leverage in the long run, Ekta, that entire partnership will remain theoretical,
Hmm.
right? It will not, come up
Materialize.
in the strong way that it should be. So while
Sure.
alignment is something which is critical and necessary, but long term, it is leverage which makes the partnership work.
Now, we talk about partnership in terms of a lot of industries and how they benefit joining hands. Tell
Hmm.
us, in your opinion, what mistakes do companies make when approaching partnerships?
I think one of the very common mistakes that companies make is they treat partnership as a shortcut.
Okay.
A lot of times people will think that if I'm not able to do A, I'll get someone, a partner, to do A for me and I'll solve for this, which I'm not saying is a wrong thing,
Hmm.
but and you assume that if I'm getting that ABC to do this particular part of my business, growth will happen because it's getting solved for. But generally, that's not how a partnership should work. Getting the fitment right is very important. What I mean by that is that partnership or getting a new partner into the mix only amplifies what you have or what they have, what they bring to the table. If the fitment itself is not right, the amplification will be for the wrong fitment. Then
Hmm.
it will become a lose-lose for everyone. Similarly, I think the other piece that also happens when there are two parties involved in any larger scenario is the lack of ownership. You need to have a very clear defined ownership in terms of who's going to do what. As far
Hmm.
as that metrics is very clear that company A will do these three things and company B will do these two things, it becomes very clear that, this is the shared goal that we are chasing and this is what everyone is supposed to do. As far
Hmm.
as these things are aligned and you are not over complicating things, I think generally it makes things better aligned and you are able to do partnerships in the right way.
All right, okay, nicely answered. Tell me, let me bring your focus to India now.
Mhm.
How do you decide who to partner with in a complex market like India? You work in that space. We probably want to know some of the cues that we can get on how you roll your eyes and how do you figure out strong partnerships in India.
No, but and that's absolutely a good question because I'll tell you, India is a interesting market. Reason being because India is one of the markets where there is complexity and there is scale, and they both exist at the same point of time. In a lot of markets, what happens is complexity is early on, and then once you reach scale, some of the complexities go away. In India, that is not the case. Even though there is scale in a lot of industries, complexity still continues to be there in different forms, right? So the way that I think about it is, number one, when deciding who to partner with in the
Mm-hmm.
country, number one is that does this partner really help me solve a problem at scale? That as I grow, will this partner be able to do it? Right? That's very important. Second is what is the USP that they are bringing onto the table? Right. For example, if I have certain capabilities, my partner should have complementary capabilities because other than that there will always be a incorrect competing angle that might come in, so it's important to have complementary capabilities. And third is, can we work together? Because a lot of times when you sign up partners, you do not account for their approach, their culture fitment, their execution speed versus yours. If these two things don't really fit, it will become very difficult for any organization or any partnership rather to work in. And I think more importantly, in India, local context matters a lot. So,
Mm.
and I've worked in global organizations. I can tell you that what a global model, which has worked well in other geographies, you cannot copy paste that here because you need people who understand this system very well.
Mm.
So I think the best partnerships are the ones where both are strategically strong and
Mm.
operationally very well aligned.
So I'm just going to ask a follow-up question, which was not in the script, but I immediately thought I should, which is early on when you're just about to bring a partner on board, how do you decide that the culture will fit your organization that well? Because what you're seeing could be different from what happens in practicality. So what's the
Absolutely.
thought process at that time?
I'll tell you. And this is where, when we were talking about intuition, this is exactly that. Because a lot of times, one is intuition, and second is most of the larger partnerships that we do, these are not short term or quick turnarounds. Partnerships generally have a slightly longer gestation period compared to other sales cycles, right? Which means that you will spend slightly more time with that team, with that partner, with that organization, understanding them and trying to understand what exactly are their incentives, what exactly it is that they have done. You'll understand and you'll look at the case studies in terms of what they have done in that domain before.
Hmm.
How quickly were they able to do those things? Were the incentives or the thought process that they were looking for aligned with the way your company or your thinking works? Those are the things, Ekta, that will eventually tell you whether that fitment or that cultural fitment is right between two companies that need to work together. And this is, by the way, partnerships is just one example. This is equally true when you're doing an M&A kind of an activity or an investment activity.
Yeah.
Because if you go for an organization where, or between two organizations where the cultural fitment is extremely different,
Hmm.
that generally never ends up in the right note.
Hmm.
So I think a lot of this is something that you learn over a period of time as you interact with the people, with the organization, see their past work, and a lot of this also comes through the intuition and your knowledge about the industry.
Lovely. All right. Now, Ankur, when you're operating at that level, there's rarely a clear right answer. When the spaces where there is no clear precedent, how do you make decisions when there's so much ambiguity in play?
Um, I think you'll eventually prompt me into saying something which is very risky, but I'll say
I'm
this.
trying my level best, yeah.
But I'll say this. Honestly, I think most decisions in those environments are about getting comfortable in being partially right. right?
Okay.
Because as I said, you rarely have a complete information. You rarely know that, this is exactly how each step will play out. So the goal isn't about being perfect. The
Yeah.
goal is about being directionally right and then continue your movement. I think that's generally the goal is. So I think you have to have a few, how do I say, mental maps in terms of few things. For example, always break down the problem into smaller parts. Then you will be able to address each one of them in a better way. You identify what is reversible versus what is irreversible. And you have to move fast on the reversible ones, because now you know that if this is something which has gone wrong, and things will go wrong, as I was telling earlier, never assume that all the things or all the coins that you have placed are going to play in the right way.
Yeah.
Things will go wrong, so you always have the opportunity to correct the things, do them as quickly as possible. So the feedback loop, the iterative cycle, the faster it is, the better it is for you.
Alrighty. Okay. Tell me, do you rely more on data, intuition, or people? I think I have an answer, but I still want to hear from you.
um, Ideally, I would say all three at different stages. And for example, as I was mentioning, I think previously as well, early on, it's generally intuition and people. I'm a heavily people's person, so for me, a lot of energy or alignment happens when I interact with the people who I have to work with,
Mm-hmm.
interact with partners, with clients, with users, with consumers. It helps me understand what exactly it is that they are looking for, what exactly it is that they are aiming towards. But I think as things evolve, data becomes more available and data becomes more useful.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the intuition is to spot the opportunity, and the data is to validate it. And in between both of them, there are people who will, how do I put it, challenge it and refine it, that opportunity or that intuition that you've thought through. So eventually, I think all three of them need to come together, to be honest with you, but at different stages. So if any of these are missing, to be honest, I think decisions tend to be a little weaker.
Alrighty. Okay. I've understood the framework, but now I want to ask you, what's your personal filter for saying a yes or a no?
um, okay. So I would say, I think first, is this actually solving a real problem, or
Hmm.
is it just sounding interesting? Because very often, and I, in my position, actually, get in touch with a lot of companies, partners, organizations who want to do something interesting. And it does always look great on paper. It sounds great that, this is new fancy thing. Maybe we can do this. It will drive a lot of eyeballs. It will, drive a lot of PR for us. But is it really solving something that I want in the long run? That's number
Yeah.
one. Number two is that, does it create significant value for me if it actually works? Very
Hmm.
often, so to put it very simply, it's a prioritization framework. Because to be honest, everyone's resources and time is limited. So
Hmm.
at the end of the day, you want to do 10 things and you might end up doing those 10 things. But which among those 10 things is the one that you have to do first? That prioritization is something which is very important. So does it create value for me? Is it solving a problem for me? And is this something that I can actually execute in the first place? For
Hmm.
example, there are times when we have taken up problems where we were either early to market or we went in without having complete understanding of how to do that, and that ended up putting us on a back foot in a way. So I think if you don't have complete clarity on some of these items, it becomes very difficult. So you also need to know your capability to execute things. As
Hmm.
far as those are saying, I think I generally go for yes. In case these are missing, then I tend for a no, because I've realized that saying no, Ekta, on the other side, is a very important skill and a very
Hmm.
critical metric in any organization, in any partnership. Because
Yeah.
if you don't know when to pull out of things or when to stop certain things, you will only end up setting up yourself for failure.
Hmm. All right. Spill the beans. Tell us, have you ever made a decision that didn't work out but fundamentally shaped how you think today?
Yes, I mean the answer is that quite a few of them that didn't work out, because at the end of the day, learn a lot from your
You
mistakes.
learn. Yeah.
So I think one that would stand out is that you end up backing ideas that look great strategically, but if they don't have the right execution muscle behind them,
Mm.
it is a really bad kind of a decision that you're making. For that matter, when you're kind of doing the entire analysis, you will see that the market, the logic, the opportunity, everything is making sense. And then suddenly, once you get into execution and you realize how hard it is, it is somewhere where you realize that I've got it into the wrong space. This is not something that I should have done. So today, with the experience that I have, I weigh a few things. For example, I will focus more on who's building this rather than or as much as what is being built.
Mm.
So the bias that I have towards people or companies or partners is equally strong as much as the bias that I have towards product and revenues and outcomes, because neither can exist without the other. At certain points of time, I was always thinking, oh, this is a great outcome, I'll do this. But how? Who's going to get this done? How
Mm.
exactly are we getting it done? Once you start asking those questions, your platform or your decision making becomes a little bit more refined. And I think that comes with age and time and with a bunch of mistakes.
Mm.
So I think over a period of time, we have learned those things, that what are those, the right decisions? How do you make them?
Alrighty. I'm going to bring your focus again to the favorite segment, which is India as a market. You have worked closely in India's digital and payments ecosystem.
Hmm.
In your opinion, what makes India uniquely challenging and uniquely exciting?
Um, I'll tell you. I think, as I was saying, India is that market that even on day one, there is always scale and
Mm.
there's always complexity. If you
Mm.
see the way a lot of global companies, when they come to India, they always feel, oh, I'm going to India. There are two mistakes that they make. One, they assume that I have done this in, any other part of the world successfully. So I'll just go and, put it in India and it'll
Replicate,
work.
yeah. Mm.
Second, they assume that, for India, this is the right approach that I have to take without doing their due diligence.
Mm.
Both of those can be very risky because you're not building for a narrow segment.
Yeah.
Unlike a lot of other, how do I say, more consistent geographies or demographies out there in the world. India, by the way, has a lot of different income groups. It
Yeah.
has a lot of different geographies, and it has a lot of different levels of being in, tech ecosystem. I would say digital comfort, right? So, and all of them behave differently, to be
Mm.
honest with you, which means that there is no single user per se who will tell you exactly this is what is required. That will work across.
Mm.
So that customization becomes very important. But as I was saying, I think what makes it very exciting is that once you build something, once you're able to deliver something, you're not just touching the lives for a small group of people, you're touching the life for almost a very large set of people.
Mm.
It works, in fact, it works reverse very well, that if you've built and scaled something in India, taking that product or taking that service or taking that operation or that process globally is so much more easier. So when I look at companies, in fact, like a few of them which I have worked with, like Pine Labs, when they're building from India for the world, I
Yeah.
realized that that approach is very smart because you have kind of worked and solved for some very complex, difficult markets already, and the bar is already high. So once you've crossed it, the
Yeah.
opportunity is massive for you.
Alrighty. Okay. Now, I want you to zoom out for a second because a lot of people listening are trying to build their own paths right now. Looking back, what did you optimize for early on in your career? Was it learning, focusing on the brand, people, or the risk? What is it that people can learn from you?
Um, okay, I'll tell you. When I was optimizing for learning, I was also optimizing that through people and environments.
Okay.
Um, because I'll tell you, okay, let me rephrase that. Um, Very early on, you have to think that because in an early stage of your career, you need to really learn what exactly you're doing it, but you also need to learn who are the people that you're doing it with, or what kind of an environment it is that you will learn in, right?
Okay.
Which means that it is not just about I learn A, B, C, D. It's also about is this problem that is being solved for? Is it an interesting problem? The people who I'm working with in terms of solving this problem are these smart people, are these sharp people, and will this build scale or will this be something that will push me
Yeah.
to my extremes? Because will this stretch me in terms of thinking what exactly I need? Those are the choices that will compound you, because with those inputs your brand will become visible. But very early on, it is the people you work with and the problems you solve that shape you. So yeah, I mean, learning was the outcome,
Yeah.
but people and environment were the inputs.
All right. So you've told us where does one need to focus. Now let me ask you, what do young professionals get wrong when trying to build great careers?
um, I think a lot of people try to optimize for certainty very early on,
Okay.
right? They want the perfect role, they want the perfect brand, they want the perfect path. But most of the careers don't really work like that. So,
Hmm.
I mean, the early phase is meant to be a little bit messy,
Yeah.
right? And also, people over-index a lot on titles and brands, right? You know, this is the
Oh, yeah.
designation, this is the company, and rather under-index on what they're actually building. And as I said, who they're actually learning with, right? So I think those are the things that compound over a period of time. Titles change fast, brands can evolve, but capabilities that you have built, skills that you have learned, that will stay with you. So I
Oh,
think very important that you optimize on them, and very early on in your career, you focus on getting those right.
okay. Tell us, if someone wants to work in high growth environments, what should they actively seek out?
High growth environments. I think first is that they have to be aligned with three things. Number
Hmm.
one, problems are still being figured out, right? So if
Yeah.
everything is already defined, growth would be slow. So the whole point is, in a high growth environment, you will be obviously thrown at problems that, as I said, nobody will have real answers for. Number two, you will work with a lot of people who are better than you, right?
Sure.
You do not account for their experience, you do not account for their backgrounds or their degrees or anything. But working with the right set of people, you will realize that that will automatically raise your own bar, right? So you should always work with smart people.
Hmm.
And I think third is where you get ownership very early on, right?
Okay.
Because that's very important, Ekta. Once you start feeling responsible for driving a particular outcome, you'll actually put in a lot of thought in terms of how you want to drive it.
Hmm.
Very early on, if you get very standardized rules where you don't really care about what the outcome is going to be, that is something that can always put you at a disadvantage. So I would rather say that, you know, it's growth doesn't come from doing more work. It comes from owning the outcomes that that work will eventually deliver. So if you are focusing on these three, four things, I think it will ensure that working in high growth companies will be very rewarding for you.
All right. Now, Ankur, eventually, all the decisions you've taken or how you've played and how you worked, everything translates into how you lead. So, how has your definition of leadership evolved over time?
Actually, that's something that I myself keep thinking about a lot,
Okay.
um, and I still keep thinking about it even till date. Because early on, I thought leadership was about having the right answers. Because most
Hmm.
of the right leaders that I looked up to, they said, "ऐसा नहीं, ऐसा करो. This is the right thing you should do. This is how you should approach this."
Hmm.
But over the time, I also realized that it is also about asking the right questions and creating clarity for others, right? Because your leadership, your role eventually shifts from doing the work to also enabling others to do good work, right?
Yeah.
That means that you have to set the direction right for them. You have to remove the blockers that they might have. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's just about giving people the confidence that, you know, what you're doing is right. So you also realize pretty quickly that leadership isn't about being the smartest person in the room. It's
Mm.
about building a room where smart people are comfortable working on. So people should be very comfortable. So at the end of the day, a leader is somebody who manages or handles his people and his resources in the most optimal manner.
Mm. Alrighty. You told us if somebody wants to work in a high growth environment, what are the things they need to prioritize and how should they move? But let me ask you, when building teams in high growth environments, what do you prioritize first? Would you pick talent? Would you go for speed? Or is it going to be the culture that you will prioritize?
Um, Very early on in an organization, you have to kind of think about culture and speed.
Okay.
But if I had to pick one among everything, I would also very heavily index on talent. See, because great people will figure out speed. People who are talented, they'll figure out speed and they know what is the right culture they themselves want to grow into.
Alrighty.
Right? So in high growth environments, you need to kind of, need a speed to kind of keep up and deliver things. You need that culture which will ensure that you sustain in high growth environments, because high growth environments are also often very high burn environments, right?
Mm-hmm.
And finally, I think you need talent to make both of these things work.
Yeah.
So it's never that these three are always mostly tightly linked, right?
Yeah.
The mistake that I think people might do is they will optimize all three from day one. I think that does not happen. You have to start with one, maybe start with a talent, and then eventually solve for the other things as well as you go down that path.
Nice. Tell us what breaks first in teams as they scale. What do you think?
Um, I would say I think clarity goes away very quickly.
Okay.
When I say that, what I mean is when teams are small, Ekta, everyone knows what is happening. Everyone knows what is required, what the expected outcome is, and everyone knows who's doing what, who's supposed to do what, right?
Yeah.
And I think as teams start scaling up, and this is something personally that I've seen a lot, this goes away. This communication goes away. So, for example, suddenly priorities feel unclear. So, if you were managing one portfolio, suddenly that portfolio, because of scale, has broken into two other parts. So, you don't know what is happening between those two teams, right? Ownership gets a little fuzzy and the communication becomes very, fragmented. And I think those challenges are very critical. So if you don't fix that quickly, everything else will also getting start affected in the wrong way. So I think a big part of scaling teams is solving for communications and clarity. Very big part. You need to ensure that you are even when things are moving fast, you need to ensure that you have the right forums where people know what exactly is expected out of them, where people can come and express their challenges, their wins, what exactly they're working on, because that will eventually give a lot of perspective in terms of how to deliver.
All right. Ankur, we've heard and we've understood how you operate professionally. Now let's bring your personal side. Outside of work, we got to know that you've been involved in teaching, community work, and even dance. How have these experiences shaped how you think as a leader?
Um, I think these experiences have made me a lot more patient and a lot less transactional.
Okay.
Um,
Good
what
choice of
I
words.
what I mean by that is that in work you are almost always focused on outcomes, you want timelines, you want decisions. But when you are working in a community, or when you're teaching people, when you're just enjoying an art form like dancing, um, people learn very differently there. And not everything can be rushed. So you have to account for everyone to come together. It also forces you to simplify your thinking, because when you are learning, you have a certain standard that, I learn maybe at a certain speed, so I'll quickly get it done. But when you're teaching, then it becomes very different, because now you have to account for every type of person who's out there, whose teaching or whose learning capabilities might be very vastly different from the other person in the room. So it, like I said, it simplifies your thinking. And if you can't explain something clearly, it also tells you that you probably don't understand it well enough yourself, right? So these things are very important, and I think dance is something that I absolutely enjoy. So
To see that though. Um, Very briefly, in the start, you did mention about the essence of non-linear experiences. I'm going to touch on that question, asking you, do you think professionals underestimate the role of non-linear experiences in their growth? Um, what do you say?
Um, I think quite a bit. Because as I said, I think there's a tendency to think that growth only comes from directly relevant experience. And that's what we have seen. That's what we have been made to believe over a period of time, right? But a lot of things that actually shape how you think or how you behave come from outside of work, right? So, for example, non-linear experiences. For example, if you go to any of the good universities, right? You go to which are the temples of learning, your schools and universities. They actively encourage kids to do things outside of studies.
Hmm.
The reason for that is very simple. It improves your communication. It builds your empathy. It tells you that you need to think differently than from a set pattern, because education is also about pattern. It's also about working or thinking in that box. But if you're not doing things outside of work, outside of the bound curriculum, your ability to think outside of the box also improves. So I think it might not show up, like I said, on your resume very immediately, but it shows up in your personality, in how you make decisions, how you work with people, how you shape your persona, your personality, your professional and personal journey over a period of time. So I think non-linear experiences don't just add variety; they also add a lot of depth
Hmm.
to people.
All right, we've come towards the last question. Happens
Okay.
to be my favorite segment. Now, this podcast is called Unapologetic Me for a reason. So, Ankur, if I ask you, what are you the most unapologetic about at this stage in your life? What would you like to say?
um, I think I'm most unapologetic about choosing substance over optics. Um I've had a lot of different opportunities in my life where I think I could have taken a more traditional path and have a more traditional outcome. But for not always picking the most obvious path, or not always optimizing for titles, predictability, and being okay with that, right? For example, there have been phases, Ekta, where things haven't looked very, linear from outside. And but for me, they were right. They were working out well for me, right? So I'm absolutely unapologetic about moving towards problems that felt uncomfortable at that point of time, because they made me who I am today. They helped me solve a lot of things. And you know, early in your career, I think you need to you feel like you need to have a clear path for everything. You need to have that visibility and that clarity. But over a period of time, you realize that you don't need all the answers. Just need to keep moving in the right direction. As far as you're doing that, you will reach the right spot at some point of time. So
Sweet. All right. So I'm going to close it now. What stands out in this conversation isn't just the role, it's the pattern. The ability to step into ambiguity, to build without a playbook, and to connect dots across industries, people, and ideas. For anyone navigating fast changing environments, this isn't just a story, it's a way of thinking. Because today, success doesn't come from following a path, it comes from learning how to build one. So, Ankur, thank you so much for sharing your journey and most importantly, your thinking style. This has been Unapologetic Me. I'm your host, Ekta Purana, and I'll see you in the next one. Until then, live your life unapologetically. Thank you.